My name is Della, and at 61 years old, I thought I understood what it meant to be a mother. For 38 years, I poured everything into my daughter Brenda. I gave her my time, my love, and yes, my money. I believed that sacrificing for your child was what good mothers did. But 3 weeks ago, when she told me I wasn't welcome at her Father's Day dinner, the dinner meant to honor the memory of my late husband, I realized I had been fooling myself. I wasn't being a good mother, I was being used, and that realization changed everything. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever felt taken for granted by someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to show you what happens when a mother finally says, "Enough is enough." Now let me take you back to where it all began. I need to start by painting you a picture of my life before everything fell apart. My husband Frank and I built a good life together in Austin, Texas. We married back in 1985 when I was just 23 and he was 25. Frank worked in construction, steady and reliable, while I spent 30 years as a nurse at St. David's Medical Center. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had our little 3-bedroom house with the big oak tree in the front yard, the one Frank always threatened to trim, but never did, because he knew I loved the shade it gave us in the summer. We had one child, our daughter Brenda. She came along 2 years after we married, and from the moment they placed her in my arms, I knew I would do anything for her. Frank used to joke that I spoiled her rotten, and looking back now, maybe he was right. But at the time, it just felt like love. When she wanted dance lessons, we found the money. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, Frank worked overtime for 6 months to buy her a used Honda Civic. When she got accepted to the University of Texas, we were so proud we could have burst. Frank and I paid for her entire education. Every semester, every textbook, every dorm fee. We didn't want her to start her adult life buried in student loan debt, like so many kids these days. She graduated with a degree in marketing, and we threw her a party that cost us $3,000. Frank grilled ribs in the backyard, and I made her favorite chocolate cake from scratch. The whole family came, and Brenda glowed with happiness. Those were good days, simple days. 3 years ago, everything changed when Frank died. He was only 58 years old. One morning, he woke up complaining of chest pain, and by that afternoon, he was gone. Massive heart attack. The doctors said he probably didn't suffer much, but I suffered enough for both of us. Losing Frank felt like losing half of myself. We had been together for 33 years. I didn't know how to be Della without Frank beside me. The life insurance policy paid out along with his pension and retirement savings. When everything was settled, I found myself sitting on about $500,000. The house was paid off. I was 58, tired from decades of nursing and grieving. So I made the decision to retire early. I thought maybe I could travel, take up hobbies, enjoy the life Frank and I had always planned for our golden years, even if I had to do it alone. Brenda was 28 when her father died. She had met Kyle 2 years earlier at some corporate networking event. Kyle worked in sales, one of those jobs where the income swung wildly from month to month depending on commissions. Some months he did well. Other months, not so much. But Brenda seemed happy with him. And after Frank died, she leaned on Kyle heavily. They got engaged 6 months after the funeral. I paid for their wedding. $25,000 for a single day. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, the band. Brenda wanted everything perfect, and I wanted to give her that. Frank would have wanted it too. The wedding was beautiful. Brenda looked stunning in her white dress, and for a few hours that day I forgot about my grief and just felt happy for my daughter. A year after the wedding, Brenda and Kyle bought a house. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom place in a new development about 15 minutes from my house. The price tag was $350,000, which seemed steep to me, but Brenda assured me they could afford it. They put down $50,000 and took out a mortgage for $300,000. Their monthly payment was $2,200 plus property taxes and insurance. When she told me the numbers, I felt a twinge of concern, but I kept my mouth shut. They were adults. They knew what they were doing, or so I thought. 2 years later, Brenda had her first baby, a little girl named Chloe. I fell in love with that child the moment I held her. 16 months after Chloe came, Mason, a chubby-cheeked boy with Frank's eyes. Seeing those children, my grandchildren, made the ache of losing Frank a little more bearable. I spent every spare moment with them, babysitting, taking them to the park, buying them toys and clothes. Being a grandmother gave me purpose again. About 2 years after Frank passed, Brenda started asking me for money. The first time, Kyle had lost his job. Some restructuring at his company, they let go of half the sales team. Brenda called me in tears, saying they couldn't make the mortgage payment. She asked if I could help them out just for a couple of months until Kyle found something new. Of course I said yes. What kind of mother would I be if I let my daughter lose her house? I wrote them a check for $4,400 to cover 2 months. Kyle found a new job 6 weeks later, but the salary was lower than his previous position. Brenda called again 3 months later. They were still struggling. Could I help one more time? I did. And then it happened again. And again. Before I knew it, helping with the mortgage had become a regular thing. Some months I paid, some months I didn't. But over the course of 2 years, I calculated that I had given Brenda and Kyle approximately $50,000 just for their mortgage. That didn't include the other thing. The $8,000 I paid for Chloe's preschool tuition because it was a really good school, and Brenda wanted the best for her daughter. The birthday gifts, the Christmas presents, the new clothes for the kids every season because they were growing so fast. The $500 here and there for groceries when times were tight. The emergency car repair when Kyle's transmission died. The dental work that their insurance didn't cover. When I sat down one evening and actually added it all up, I realized I had given them close to $100,000 over the past few years. $100,000. That was a fifth of everything I had. But I told myself it was worth it. They were my family. Brenda was my only child, and Chloe and Mason were my only grandchildren. Family helps family, right? That's what I believed. That's what I kept telling myself every time I wrote another check. But as the months went on, something started to shift. At first, it was small things I almost didn't notice. Brenda used to call me just to chat, to tell me about her day or ask for advice on the kids. Those calls became less frequent. When she did call, it was usually because she needed something, money mostly, but sometimes babysitting at the last minute, or help with some household project. The gratitude started to fade too. In the beginning, when I helped with the mortgage, Brenda would thank me profusely. She would cry on the phone and tell me I was saving them, that she didn't know what they would do without me. She promised they would pay me back someday. But as time went on, the thank yous became shorter, more perfunctory. Sometimes just a quick text that said, "Got it, thanks." And the promises to pay me back stopped altogether. I started noticing other things too. When I visited their house, I saw new purchases. A massive television that took up half their living room wall. It must have cost thousands of dollars. When I asked about it, Brenda shrugged and said they got a good deal on Black Friday. A few months later, they had new furniture, this gorgeous sectional sofa in soft grey leather. I complimented it, and Kyle said something about how they deserved to have nice things. I bit my tongue. They deserved nice things, but they couldn't afford their mortgage. The logic didn't track, but I didn't want to start a fight. I told myself maybe they had saved up. Maybe Kyle had gotten a bonus. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, because that's what you do for people you love. Then came my birthday in April. I turned 61. Birthdays had been hard since Frank died. He always made a big deal out of them: breakfast in bed and flowers and a homemade card with some silly poem he wrote. After he passed, I tried not to expect much, but I couldn't help hoping Brenda would do something special. Maybe take me out to dinner or come over with the kids to celebrate. A week before my birthday, I mentioned it casually on the phone. Just said I couldn't believe another year had passed. Brenda made a non-committal sound and changed the subject. On the day itself, she called in the morning and sang a quick happy birthday. She said they were really swamped that week with work stuff and Kyle's family visiting, but maybe we could get together the following weekend to celebrate. I said of course that would be lovely. The following weekend came and went. No dinner, no celebration. I didn't hear from Brenda at all. I told myself she was busy, that life with two small children was chaotic. I spent my birthday dinner at a restaurant with two friends from my nursing days, and they were lovely company, but I couldn't shake the hurt. Then, about a week after my forgotten birthday, I was scrolling through Facebook and saw that Brenda had posted pictures from the week of my birthday. Photos of her and Kyle at some upscale steakhouse candlelit table. Fancy cocktails, both of them dressed up. The caption read, "Finally got our date night, needed this so much." My stomach twisted. She was too busy to have dinner with me, her mother, on my birthday. But she had time for a date night at an expensive restaurant. I called her, trying to keep my voice calm. I asked about the photos. Brenda got flustered and said it was Kyle's company dinner, something last minute they couldn't get out of. But the caption clearly said date night. I knew she was lying, but I didn't push. I just said okay and got off the phone. That night I sat in Frank's old recliner and cried. Not just because my birthday had been forgotten, but because I was starting to see a pattern. Brenda took from me when she needed something, but when I needed her, even just for companionship, I wasn't a priority. And yet I kept giving. Because I didn't know how to stop. Because I was afraid that if I stopped, I would lose her completely. In May, Brenda called again. They needed help with the mortgage. I asked her gently how things were going financially, whether they had looked into budgeting or cutting expenses. She got irritated immediately. Her voice went sharp and defensive. Did I want to help them or not? I said of course I would help. But maybe we should sit down and make a plan for how they could manage on their own eventually. She cut me off and said the plan was I would help them until they got back on their feet. And could I please just transfer the money without the lecture? I transferred $2,200 that same day. I felt awful, like I had done something wrong by suggesting they budget. But after I sent the money, I looked at Brenda's social media again. New posts. Photos of her with fresh manicured nails holding a designer purse I recognized as costing at least $600. Another photo of Mason's birthday party with an elaborate superhero cake from an expensive bakery. A bounce house rental in the backyard. And goodie bags for all the kids that must have cost a fortune. They couldn't afford their mortgage, but they could afford all that. The anger started then, small and hot in my chest. But along with the anger was fear. Fear that if I confronted her, if I stopped helping, she would cut me out of her life. I would lose access to my grandchildren. So I swallowed the anger and told myself I was being petty, that I should be happy they could still give the kids nice things despite their struggles. Looking back now, I see how twisted my thinking had become. I was paying for their home while they spent their money on luxuries, and I was the one feeling guilty for being upset about it. That's what happens when you love someone more than you love yourself. You let them drain you dry and convince yourself you're lucky to be needed. The breaking point came in early June. Father's Day was approaching. The third Father's Day since Frank had died. For the past 2 years, Brenda and I had spent the day together. We would visit Frank's grave in the morning, bring fresh flowers, sit and talk to him for a while. Then we would come back to my house or hers and have a quiet dinner. Just the family remembering Frank and sharing stories about him with Chloe and Mason, even though they were too young to really remember their grandfather. Those Father's Days were bittersweet, but important to me. They were a way of keeping Frank's memory alive, of making sure the kids knew who he was. And they were a way for Brenda and me to grieve together, to support each other through the sadness. So in the second week of June, I called Brenda to coordinate plans. I asked what time we should meet at the cemetery. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Brenda said in a careful voice that they were doing something different this year. She and Kyle were planning a Father's Day dinner at their house for Kyle's dad. I felt confused. Kyle's dad, Tom, lived about an hour away. They saw him occasionally, but they had never made a big deal about Father's Day with him before. I said that was nice and asked if we could visit Frank's grave in the morning before their dinner. Brenda said they were busy in the morning too, something about Kyle's mum wanting to do a big breakfast. The confusion turned into a cold knot in my stomach. I said slowly, "Okay, well, could I come to the dinner then? It would be nice to spend part of Father's Day together, even if we couldn't visit Frank's grave." I waited for her to say, "Of course, Mum, you're always welcome." Instead, there was silence. Then Brenda said, and I will never forget the exact words she said. It was really just for Kyle's family. Just for them. I stammered, trying to understand. I said I was family too. I was her mother. She sighed, that exasperated sigh teenagers give their parents when they're being deliberately obtuse. She said this Father's Day was about Kyle's dad, not about mine. It would be awkward if I was there. Kyle's family was very close-knit. They had their own traditions, and my presence would complicate things. Complicate things. My presence would complicate things. I felt like I had been slapped. I said, voice shaking now, that I couldn't believe she was excluding me from Father's Day, the day we had spent together every year since her father died. Didn't she want to remember Frank? Didn't that matter to her anymore? Brenda's tone went cold. She said Dad was gone. He had been gone for 3 years. Life moved on. Kyle's dad was alive and here, and he deserved to be celebrated. She said I needed to stop making everything about me and respect her choices. This was her house, her family, and she had made the decision that I wasn't invited. I asked if this was because I had questioned their spending, because I had suggested a budget. She snapped that this had nothing to do with money. This was about me being unable to accept that her life didn't revolve around me anymore. Then she said she had to go and hung up. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the wall. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking I must have misunderstood. But no, it was clear. My daughter had uninvited me from Father's Day, the day meant to honor fathers, the day her own father should be remembered. And she said my presence would complicate things. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and all the pieces started falling into place. The forgotten birthday, the lack of gratitude, the new purchases while claiming poverty, the increasingly demanding tone when she needed money. Brenda didn't see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as a bank account, a resource to be tapped when convenient and ignored when not needed. And the worst part was I had let it happen. I had been so desperate to be needed, so afraid of losing her, that I had allowed her to treat me this way. Frank would have been ashamed of me. He had always worried I was too soft with Brenda, that I didn't teach her about responsibility and consequences. And now, 3 years after his death, she was dishonoring his memory by excluding me from Father's Day. Something hardened in me that night, a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I got out of bed around 3 in the morning, went to my home office and turned on the computer. I pulled up my bank statements and went through every transaction from the past 2 years. I made a list of every penny I had given Brenda and Kyle. The mortgage payments, the preschool tuition, the gifts, the emergency funds. It all added up to 97,000 and change, almost $100,000. $100,000, and she couldn't even invite me to dinner. Couldn't even pretend to care about honoring her father's memory. I sat there looking at that number as the sun came up, and I made a decision. If I wasn't family enough to be included, then I wasn't family enough to keep funding their lifestyle. I spent the next few days thinking through what I was going to do. I'm not an impulsive person. 30 years as a nurse taught me to stay calm under pressure, to think things through before acting. I knew if I cut off the money, there would be consequences. Brenda would be angry. She might cut me off from the grandchildren. But as I thought about it more, I realized she had already cut me off in the ways that mattered. She had reduced our relationship to transactions. I gave money, she took it. Nothing more. I looked at my checkbook. I had already written the next mortgage check, $2,200, for July, dated for the 30th of June. Brenda expected me to mail it by the end of the month. For a moment, I imagined just sending it, like always keeping the peace, pretending everything was fine. But then I thought about Frank, about how hard he worked to provide for us, about how he would feel knowing his daughter couldn't even honor him on Father's Day. I picked up the check and tore it into small pieces. Then I took all the pieces and threw them in the trash. It felt good, like taking back a tiny piece of myself. Over the next week, I didn't hear from Brenda at all. Not a call, not a text. I knew she was busy preparing for her big Father's Day celebration, the one I wasn't invited to. I wondered if she would even think about Frank that day. If she would spare even a moment to remember the man who raised her, who worked overtime to buy her a car, who paid for her education, who walked her down the aisle at her wedding. Father's Day fell on the third Sunday of June. I woke up that morning to an empty house and silence. I got dressed slowly, putting on the blue dress Frank always said brought out my eyes. I made myself breakfast, though I could barely eat. Then I got in my car and drove to the cemetery alone. The cemetery was beautiful that morning, peaceful and green. Frank's grave was in a section under a large elm tree. His headstone was simple. Francis James Thompson, loving husband and father, 1962 to 2021. I had brought his favorite flowers, yellow roses. I knelt down and arranged them in the vase built into the headstone. I talked to him for a long time, told him about what Brenda had done, how she had excluded me, how she had forgotten him. I told him I was sorry. Sorry I had spoiled her, sorry I hadn't taught her better. Sorry I had let things get this bad. I cried there alone under that elm tree, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt truly angry at him for leaving me to deal with this alone. After an hour, I drove home. The house felt emptier than ever. I looked at my phone. Nothing. No text from Brenda wishing me a happy Father's Day in memory of Frank. No photo of the kids. Nothing. I opened Facebook knowing I shouldn't, but unable to help myself. There it was. A post from Brenda uploaded an hour ago. A photo of their dining room table laden with food. Kyle and his parents smiling. Chloe and Mason in matching outfits. The caption read, "Wonderful Father's Day celebration with Dad Tom. So blessed to have such an amazing father-in-law." There were heart emojis and photos of Tom opening presents. Not one mention of Frank, not one photo at his grave, not one acknowledgement that today was also a day to remember the father who was gone. She had erased him. On Father's Day, she had completely erased him. I closed Facebook and sat in the silence of my living room, and I felt for the first time completely at peace with my decision. Tomorrow, Brenda would call asking where the mortgage check was, and I was ready. The call came on Monday afternoon. I was in the garden deadheading roses when my phone rang. Brenda's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Let it go to voicemail. But I wanted to hear what she would say. I wanted to hear if there would be any acknowledgement of what she had done. I answered. Brenda didn't even say hello. She said, "Where's the check?" Her voice was strained, anxious. I said calmly, "What check?" She said, "The mortgage check, Mum. It's the 28th. The payment is due in 3 days. I need to deposit it." I said I didn't send a check this month. Silence on the other end. Then she said, "What do you mean you didn't send it? You always send it." I said very calmly that I had decided not to pay their mortgage anymore, that they needed to figure out how to afford their own house. Brenda's voice went up an octave. She said I couldn't do this. They were counting on that money. The payment was due on the 1st, and they didn't have it. I asked why they didn't have it if Kyle was working. She said that wasn't the point. The point was I had promised to help, and now I was backing out without warning. I said I never promised to support them indefinitely. I had helped out of love, but I couldn't keep giving while being treated like I didn't matter. She said treated like I didn't matter. What was I talking about? I said, "Brenda, you uninvited me from Father's Day. You didn't even acknowledge your father's memory. You made it very clear I'm not part of your family unless you need money." She started to argue, said I was being manipulative, that I was holding money over her head to control her. I stayed calm. I said this wasn't about control. This was about self-respect. I said I had given her and Kyle nearly $100,000 over the past few years, and instead of gratitude, I got exclusion and disrespect. So no, I would not be sending any more mortgage checks. Brenda started crying. She said I was going to make them lose their house. I said one missed payment wouldn't make them lose their house. They would just get a late fee. Maybe it would teach them to budget better. She said we couldn't afford the house without my help. Didn't I understand that? And I said, then maybe you shouldn't have bought such an expensive house. Maybe Kyle should find a better job. Maybe you both should stop buying designer purses and big screen TVs while claiming you can't pay your bills. There was a long silence. Then Brenda said, voice cold, "You've been judging us this whole time. Watching what we spend money on," I said. "I wasn't judging, I was observing. And what I observed was that you had money for luxuries, but not for necessities. That told me you didn't actually need my help. You just wanted it because it was easier than being responsible." She called me cruel. She said Frank would be ashamed of me. That hit hard. But I didn't back down. I said Frank would be ashamed of you for forgetting him on Father's Day, for excluding your own mother, for taking advantage of my grief and generosity. Don't you dare use his name to manipulate me. She hung up on me. Within minutes, my phone started buzzing with texts. Angry texts, desperate texts, texts saying I was ruining their lives, that the kids would suffer, that I was choosing money over family. I read each one calmly, then I turned off my phone and went back to my roses. The next few days were quiet. I didn't turn my phone back on until Tuesday evening. When I did, there were 32 messages and 14 missed calls. Most from Brenda, a few from Kyle. I read through them. The tone shifted from anger to desperation. Brenda said they had tried to get an emergency loan, but couldn't. Kyle said they were going to have to borrow from his parents at a high interest rate. Brenda sent one final message that said she hoped I was happy, that I had destroyed her sense of security, that she would never forgive me. I didn't respond to any of them. On Wednesday, Kyle called from his number. I answered. He sounded exhausted. He said, "Della, please, we really need this money. We can't make the payment. We're going to get hit with a $400 late fee. Isn't there any way you can help us just this once? I said, Kyle, I've helped you dozens of times. I've given you nearly $100,000. I can't anymore. He said they would pay me back, they promised. I laughed, couldn't help it. I said, you've promised that before and never followed through. He got quiet. Then he said, what about the kids? This affects Chloe and Mason too. I said the kids would be fine. One late payment wouldn't make them homeless. What the kids needed was parents who knew how to be responsible. Parents who didn't live beyond their means. Parents who didn't manipulate grandparents for money. He said that was low and hung up. I heard through a mutual friend that Brenda and Kyle had indeed borrowed money from Kyle's parents. At a steep interest rate, practically loan shark terms, because Kyle's parents didn't have much either. They made the mortgage payment 2 days late and got hit with the penalty fee. I also heard they had put some of their furniture up for sale. The expensive leather sectional, the big TV. They needed cash fast. 2 weeks after our phone confrontation, my doorbell rang on a Tuesday evening. I looked through the peephole and saw Brenda standing there. She looked terrible. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She had lost weight. I opened the door. We stood there looking at each other. She said quietly, "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room, the same room where Frank and I used to watch TV together every night. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Brenda said, "I'm sorry." I waited. She twisted her hands in her lap. She said she was sorry for excluding me from Father's Day, sorry for not acknowledging Dad, sorry for taking me for granted. The words came slowly, painfully. She said the past 2 weeks had been hell, that she and Kyle had fought constantly, that the stress of scrambling for mortgage money had made her realize how much they had been depending on me, how much they had been using me. I asked her why she did it, why she excluded me. She looked down at her hands and said she didn't have a good reason. Kyle's dad had been making a big deal about Father's Day, about how he never got properly celebrated. Kyle had wanted to make him happy, and it seemed easier to just focus on Tom, to not have to deal with the sadness of remembering Dad. She said it was selfish. She said she knew that now. I said, Brenda, you didn't just exclude me from a dinner. You erased your father from Father's Day. Do you understand how much that hurt? She nodded, crying now. She said she understood. She said she had been so caught up in her own life, her own problems, that she forgot what really mattered. She forgot that I wasn't just a source of money. I was her mother, the only parent she had left. I felt my own eyes fill with tears, but I didn't let them fall. I said, you need to understand something. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep giving you money while you treat me like I'm inconvenient. She said she knew. She said things were going to change. She and Kyle had both gotten second jobs. Kyle was working nights at a warehouse, and she had started doing freelance social media work from home. They had made a real budget. They were selling things they didn't need. They were going to learn to live within their means. I said I was proud of her for that. But I also said we needed to set some boundaries. I would not be paying their mortgage anymore. Not regularly, and probably not at all. If there was a genuine emergency, we could discuss it. But they needed to prove they could handle their own responsibilities first. She agreed. I said I also needed her to respect me, to include me in family events, to remember that I was her mother, not just when she needed something, but all the time. She said she would. She promised. Then she asked, voice small, if I could forgive her. I said I didn't know yet. That forgiveness would take time. But I was willing to try to rebuild our relationship if she was serious about changing. She stayed for an hour. We talked about Frank, about good memories. She cried and said she missed him, said she was sorry she hadn't been to his grave on Father's Day. She promised next year would be different. Next year we would go together, just her and me and the kids. We would remember him properly. When she left, I felt drained, but also lighter somehow. I didn't know if things would really change. People don't transform overnight. But for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had my daughter back. Not the perfect relationship we used to have, but something real, something built on honesty instead of obligation. It's been 3 months now since that conversation. I wish I could tell you everything became perfect, but life doesn't work that way. Brenda and Kyle are still struggling. I know they are. I see it in the way Brenda looks tired when she brings the kids to visit, in the way Kyle has lost his easy smile. But they're managing. They've been making their mortgage payments on their own, usually on time. Occasionally a few days late, but always catching up. Brenda calls me more now, not to ask for money, but just to talk. She tells me about the kids, about funny things they said or did. She asks my advice on parenting stuff. She invites me to dinner at least twice a month, and when I come over, she cooks my favorite meals. Simple things, spaghetti and meatballs, or pot roast, nothing fancy. But they're made with love, and that's what matters. She's also started being more thoughtful in small ways. She remembered my birthday last month, took me out to a little Italian place I love. Just the two of us. No kids, no Kyle. We had wine and talked for 3 hours. It felt like old times. She gave me a framed photo of Frank holding baby Brenda, one I'd never seen before. She said she'd found it while cleaning out some boxes and thought I would want it. I cried right there in the restaurant. We visited Frank's grave together in August, on what would have been his 60th birthday. Brenda brought flowers, and we sat there for an hour telling him stories. Chloe and Mason came too, and we told them about their grandfather. How he used to make silly faces to make them laugh when they were babies. How he built them a toy box before Mason was even born, painted it with both their names. The kids listened wide-eyed, and for the first time, I felt like Frank's memory was being honored the way it should be. Things still aren't perfect. Brenda and I still have moments of tension. She still gets defensive sometimes when I offer advice. I still catch myself wanting to fix all her problems, and I have to remind myself that's not my job anymore. My job is to be her mother, to love her, but also to let her be an adult who makes her own choices and deals with her own consequences. I've also started focusing on myself more. I joined a book club with some women from church. I started taking watercolor painting classes on Thursday mornings. I'm planning a trip to Ireland next spring. Something Frank and I always talked about but never did. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living for me, not just existing in the shadow of other people's needs. Kyle even apologized to me last month. He came over one Saturday morning and helped me trim that big oak tree in the front yard, the one Frank never got around to. While we worked, he said he was sorry for how they had treated me. Said he knew they had taken advantage, and he felt ashamed. He said he was raised better than that, and he was working on being the kind of man his dad and my Frank would be proud of. I appreciated that. It took courage to say. The hardest lesson I've learned through all of this is that sometimes loving someone means letting them struggle. It means watching them fail and not rushing in to catch them. As a mother, every instinct in my body wants to protect my child from pain. But Brenda isn't a child anymore. She's a 35-year-old woman with children of her own. She needs to know she's capable of solving her own problems, and I need to know that our relationship is based on love, not dependency. I think about those 2 years when I was writing check after check, telling myself I was being a good mother. But I was wrong. A good mother teaches her children to stand on their own 2 feet. A good mother loves herself enough to demand respect. A good mother knows when to help and when to step back. Frank understood that better than I did. I wish he were here to see how things have turned out. I think he would be proud of me for finally learning the lesson he tried to teach me years ago. Sometimes at night I still sit in Frank's old recliner and think about everything that happened, about how close I came to losing my self-respect completely, about how Brenda almost destroyed our relationship by taking me for granted. But we both learned and grew from it. Our relationship now is more honest, more equal. It's not perfect, but it's real. And that's worth more than all the mortgage payments in the world. So here we are at the end of my story. I didn't tell you this to make Brenda look bad, or to paint myself as some kind of hero. I told you this because I think there are a lot of people out there, especially mothers, who give and give and give until there's nothing left, who mistake enabling for love, who are so afraid of being alone or rejected that they let people use them. If that's you, I want you to know it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no, even to family, especially to family. Because real love doesn't drain you. Real love doesn't take everything and give nothing back. Real love respects boundaries and values the person, not just what they can provide. The hardest thing I ever did, Zhao, was cancel that mortgage check. Standing my ground while my daughter called me cruel, sleeping alone with the fear that I might lose my grandchildren. But it was also the most important thing I ever did, because it taught Brenda that I was more than a bank account. It taught her that actions have consequences. And it taught me that I deserved better than being treated like I only mattered when I was useful. I'm not telling you to cut off everyone who's ever taken advantage of you, but I am telling you to take a hard look at your relationships. Ask yourself if they're balanced. Ask yourself if you're being valued or just used. And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time to make some changes. It won't be easy. Change never is. But your self-respect is worth fighting for. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you loved took advantage of your generosity? How did you handle it? Did you set boundaries, or did you keep giving? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with the same thing. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to hear more real stories about real people dealing with real problems. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I share new stories every week about family relationships and the hard lessons we learn in life. And share this with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe a friend who's always putting everyone else first and forgetting to take care of themselves. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it was long, but some stories can't be told in a few minutes. Life is complicated, and the important lessons take time to unfold. I hope my experience gave you something to think about, maybe even gave you the courage to make some changes in your own life. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no.